Hello and welcome to Bounding into Comics. My name is John Trent. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief at Bounding into Comics. And today I got a story about Lord of the Rings fan site, theonering.net, implying that the Lord of the Rings author J.R.R. Tolkien, as a Catholic, would celebrate LGBTQ. Before we get to that story, I'd like to ask you to please hit that subscribe button if you are not already subscribed. If you are already subscribed, please make sure you are still subscribed. YouTube likes to unsubscribe people randomly for whatever reason. And then hopefully by the end of this video, I will have earned your like, and you will give us a like, and that you will then share this with your friends and family. And then finally, I encourage you to hit that bell button so you get notifications and you don't miss any of our videos. With that out of the way, let's get to this story. As I said, Lord of the Rings fan site theonering.net recently implied that author J.R.R. Tolkien would celebrate LGBTQ. Theonering.net made the claim on Twitter in early June after claiming they were quote dealing with homophobic comments, end quote. This is what they originally tweeted, which we covered in a separate video. They tweeted, quote, "Listen, we've been dealing with homophobic comments for decades and it's still wrong. Whatever toxic arguments are being said now about Lord of the Rings fandom and adaptations is the same trash that said Ian McKellen was the worst affront to Tolkien's legacy ever. #pride. Twitter user BlackSageD responded to this initial tweet. He tweeted, quote, "Wait until you find out that J.R.R. Tolkien is a devout Roman Catholic Christian. Boy, are you guys in for a major shock." He then added, "In fact, Lord of the Rings was heavily inspired by Christianity, and I'm pretty sure Christianity doesn't look too kindly on the alphabet people," end quote. And that's when theonering.net responded, tweeting, "Tolkien followed the church, and the church celebrates LGBTQ, so I think the surprise is on you," end quote. Father Christopher Miller, a Catholic priest, responded to theonering.net's claim. He wrote on Twitter, quote, "What the heck? As a priest of Catholic Church, of which Tolkien was a devout member, that I can tell you that we do not celebrate LGBTQ. You do realize the Catholic symbolism through Lord of the Rings, right? Lembas as a comparison to the Eucharist, the real bread of life. The Catholic Church's teaching on LGBTQ and homosexuality is quite clear. Section 2357 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church begins the section titled Chastity and Homosexuality. It reads, homosexuality refers to relations between men or between women who experience an exclusive or predominant sexual attraction towards persons of the same sex. It has taken a great variety of forms through the centuries and in different cultures. Its psychological genesis remains largely unexplained, basing itself on sacred scripture, which presents homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity. Tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They are contrary to the natural law." The section concludes, quote, "They close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine, effective, and sexual complementarity. Under no circumstances can they be approved." Section 2358 elaborates, "The number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. This inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross, the difficulties they may encounter from their condition." Finally, section 2359 concludes the section titled Chastity and Homosexuality. It reads, "Homosexual persons are called to chastity by the virtues of self-mastery that teach them inner freedom, at times by the support of disinterested friendship, by prayer and sacramental grace. They can and should gradually and resolutely approach Christian perfection." Along with the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops issued a 26-page paper titled Ministry to Persons with Homosexual Inclination in 2006. In that paper, it reads, quote, "The Church teaches that persons with a homosexual inclination must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. We recognize that these persons have been and often continue to be objects of scorn, hatred, and even violence in some sectors of our society. Sometimes this hatred is manifested clearly, other times it is masked and gives rise to more disguised forms of hatred. It is deplorable that homosexual persons have been and are the object of violent malice in speech or in action. Such treatment deserves condemnation from the church's pastors wherever it occurs. Later in the paper, it also states, because of both original sin and personal sin, moral disorder is all too common in our world. There are a variety of acts, such as adultery, fornication, masturbation, and contraception, that violate the proper ends of human sexuality. Homosexual acts also violate the true purpose of sexuality. The paper explains, they are sexual acts that cannot be open to life, nor do they reflect the complementarity of man and woman that is an integral part of God's design for human sexuality. Consequently, the Catholic Church has consistently taught that homosexual acts are contrary to the natural law. Under no circumstances can they be approved. The paper goes on to cite St. Paul's first letter to the Romans. St. Paul said in the first letter to the Romans, therefore God handed them over to degrading passions. Their females exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and the males likewise gave up natural relations with females and burned with lust for one another. Males did shameful things with males, and thus received in their own persons the due penalty for their perversity. The paper would go on to clarify the church's position. It reads, quote, while the church teaches that homosexual acts are immoral, she does distinguish between engaging in homosexual acts and having a homosexual inclination. While the former is always objectively sinful, the latter is not. Continues, to the extent that a homosexual tendency or inclination is not subject to one's free will, one is not morally culpable for that tendency. Although one would be morally culpable if one were voluntarily to entertain homosexual temptations or to choose to act on them, simply having the tendency is not a sin. Consequently, the church does not teach that the experience of homosexual attraction is in itself sinful. The paper reiterates, it is crucially important to understand that saying a person has a particular inclination that is disordered is not to say that the person as a whole is disordered, nor does it mean that one has been rejected by God or the church. Sometimes the church is misinterpreted or misrepresented as teaching that persons with homosexual inclinations are objectively disordered, as if everything about them were disordered or rendered morally defective by this inclination. Rather, the disorder is in that particular inclination, which is not ordered toward the fulfillment of the natural ends of human sexuality. Because of this, acting in accord with such an inclination simply cannot contribute to the true good of the human person. Nevertheless, while the particular inclination to homosexual acts is disordered, the person retains his or her intrinsic human dignity and value. So, it's pretty clear the Roman Catholic Church does not celebrate LGBTQ as the OneRing.net claims it does, and their implication that Tolkien would do so is far-fetched to say the least. This just appears to be another instance of the OneRing.net trying to rewrite actual history to suit their own agenda. It's wrong, and we here at Bounding into Comics are going to call it out. The OneRing.net is wrong once again, and they seem to be wrong quite a bit recently. We will continue to be calling them out when they when they are wrong. Let me know what you make of the OneRing.net's implication about Tolkien, their false claim. Leave a comment below. My name is John Trent, and you've been watching Bounding into Comics.